Diego Martinez stared at his son's acceptance letter to Riverside Music Academy, knowing he'd never earn enough from his small auto repair shop to make those dreams come true. For 8 years, the widowed mechanic had worked 18-hour days in his cramped garage in Millbrook, invisible to the world that valued corporate success over honest hard work. Then came the rainy Tuesday, when he fixed a stranger's broken-down car for free, asking for nothing in return. But what that mysterious woman brought back to Diego's shop 3 weeks later would change everything, not just for Diego and his son, but for every struggling small business owner in their forgotten corner of town. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm clock's harsh buzz pierced through the pre-dawn darkness at 5:30 a.m., but Diego Martinez was already awake, staring at the water stains spreading across his bedroom ceiling. He'd been counting the cracks in that stain for 2 years now, ever since Rosa died and sleep became something that happened to other people. The gentle sound of his 12-year-old son Carlos practicing violin drifted through the thin walls of their apartment above the auto repair shop. Diego rolled out of bed, his 34-year-old body protesting with aches that felt more like 50. His oil-stained hands reached automatically for the simple gold wedding band he still wore, Rosa's memory a constant companion in the loneliness that had become his world. Some mornings he forgot she was gone for those first precious seconds, expecting to smell coffee brewing and hear her terrible off-key singing along to Carlos's practice. But the silence always reminded him. The small kitchen was exactly as he'd left it 12 hours ago, spotless because there was no one else to clean up after. He started the ancient coffee maker, a garage sale find that Rosa had insisted would build character, and began preparing Carlos's breakfast. 2 pieces of whole wheat toast, scrambled eggs with just a touch of cheese, and fresh orange juice from the Valencia oranges that grew behind their building. It was the same breakfast every morning, a routine that gave structure to their fractured world. "Morning, Dad." Carlos appeared in the doorway, his dark hair still damp from the shower, carrying his violin case and backpack. At 12, he was already showing signs of Rosa's musical talent and Diego's stubborn determination. He'd grown 3 inches in the past year, and Diego sometimes caught glimpses of the young man he was becoming, brilliant, passionate, and destined for things far beyond the boundaries of their small Millbrook neighborhood. "Morning, mijo. Sleep okay?" Diego slid the plate across their small table, noting the shadows under Carlos's eyes. His son had been staying up late practicing for the regional youth orchestra auditions, knowing that a spot in the program could lead to scholarships and opportunities they could never afford otherwise. "Better than you, I think," Carlos said, taking a grateful sip of orange juice. "I heard you moving around at 3 a.m. again." Diego poured his coffee into the chipped mug that read, "World's Greatest Dad," a Father's Day gift from Carlos when he was 8. Just thinking. Mrs. Patterson's transmission is making that noise again, and I can't figure out what's causing it. Carlos gave him a look that said he wasn't buying the excuse, but he didn't push. They'd learned to navigate around each other's pain carefully, like dancers who knew each other's steps by heart. "I got something yesterday," Carlos said quietly, reaching into his backpack. He pulled out a thick envelope with the Riverside Music Academy logo embossed in gold. "I was gonna wait, but I can't keep it to myself anymore." Diego's coffee mug froze halfway to his lips. They'd talked about music schools, filled out the application together, but seeing the actual letter made everything real in a way that stole his breath. "Open it," Diego whispered. Carlos's hands trembled slightly as he tore the envelope. His eyes scanned the letter once, twice, and then a smile broke across his face like sunrise. "I got in, Dad. Full consideration for their junior program. They want me." The pride that swelled in Diego's chest was immediately followed by a crushing weight of reality. He knew exactly what full consideration meant. It was academy speak for, "You're talented enough, but can you pay?" The junior program at Riverside Music Academy was prestigious, competitive, and expensive. Even with financial aid, they'd need at least $18,000 a year for tuition, room, and board. Diego made $28,000 a year from Martinez Auto Repair, working on everything from oil changes to complete engine rebuilds. After rent, groceries, Carlos's violin lessons, and the medical bills that still trickled in from Rosa's final months, They had maybe $200 in savings. $200 toward an $18,000 dream. That's incredible, mijo. I'm so proud of you. He meant every word, even as his mind raced through impossible calculations. Maybe he could take on more work, extend his hours even further. Maybe they could take out loans. Maybe he could sell the shop, find a job with better pay. Carlos was watching his face, and his smile faltered. Dad, I know it's expensive. I've been looking at the community college music program too, and there's a really good teacher there who… No. The word came out sharper than Diego intended. No, mijo. You're not settling for community college because of money. We'll figure it out. But even as he said it, Diego felt the familiar weight of inadequacy settling on his shoulders. Rosa had always been the dreamer, the one who believed everything would work out. She'd encouraged Carlos's music from the time he could hold a plastic recorder, buying sheet music from garage sales and saving for months to afford a decent violin. Diego was the practical one, the one who worried about rent and groceries and keeping the lights on. After Rosa died, he'd tried to be both parents, the dreamer and the worrier, the cheerleader and the disciplinarian. Most days he felt like he was failing at both jobs. Carlos reached across the table and squeezed his hand. We'll figure it out together, Dad. Maybe I can get more scholarships or work part-time at the music store downtown. You concentrate on school and your music. Let me worry about the money. Diego stood up and kissed the top of his son's head, breathing in the scent of his shampoo. I've got to open the shop. You need a ride to school? Katie's mom is picking me up. We're practicing for the orchestra audition during lunch. Good. And Carlos? Diego paused at the kitchen doorway. Your mom would be so proud of both of us. After Carlos left for school, Diego tried to focus on work, but the acceptance letter seemed to glow from where it sat on the kitchen counter. He found himself calculating and recalculating, trying to make the numbers work. Even if he picked up every piece of work that came through his door, even if he worked 7 days a week, the math was unforgiving. The truth was that Diego Martinez had been invisible for 8 years. Invisible men didn't get business loans or major contracts. They got by on oil changes and brake jobs, competing with chain stores that could undercut their prices, and big shops that had the latest diagnostic equipment. Martinez Auto Repair occupied a converted gas station on the edge of Millbrook's declining downtown. Diego had inherited it from his father, along with a mortgage that would take another 15 years to pay off. The building was old, the equipment older, but it was his. It was also barely enough to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. As Diego walked through his shop that morning, he felt the weight of dreams that seemed too big for his small world. But somewhere in the back of his mind, he could hear Rosa's voice reminding him that the biggest changes often started with the smallest acts of kindness. He had no idea that in just a few hours, a stranger's broken-down car would set in motion a chain of events that would prove her right. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The storm hit Millbrook just after 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, unusual for September, but fierce enough to send sheets of rain across the empty streets and turn the old downtown into a ghost town. Diego had been working under the hood of a 2015 Honda Civic when the first crack of thunder shook the windows of Martinez Auto Repair. He'd grown accustomed to working alone during the slow weekday afternoons when most people were at their office jobs and his shop sat quietly on the forgotten edge of town. The rain was coming down in torrents when Diego heard the distinctive sound of an engine sputtering to a stop just outside his bay doors. Through the downpour, he could make out the shape of a sleek black sedan, expensive looking, the kind of car that usually drove straight past his neighborhood to the dealership service centers in the affluent part of town. Bay. Diego wiped his hands on his coveralls and jogged through the rain to where the car had coasted to a stop. The driver's side window rolled down to reveal a woman in her 40s, impeccably dressed in a tailored business suit despite the chaos of the storm. Her silver hair was pulled back in a professional style, and even in her obvious distress, she carried herself with the kind of confidence that spoke of boardrooms and important decisions. I'm so sorry to bother you, the woman said, her voice carrying a slight accent Diego couldn't quite place. My car just died completely. The engine light came on about 5 miles back, and then everything just stopped. Diego looked at the sedan, a late-model Lexus with temporary plates. The kind of car that cost more than Diego made in 2 years. No problem at all. Let me take a look. I'm Diego Martinez. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the woman replied, extending her hand through the window. I'm supposed to be at the children's hospital for an emergency surgery in an hour, but she gestured helplessly at her dead car. Diego's mind immediately went to work. Emergency surgery meant someone's child was counting on Dr. Vasquez being there. Rain or no rain, broken car or not, Diego understood the weight of that responsibility. Let me pop the hood and see what we're dealing with, Diego said, already moving toward the front of the car. Do you mind pulling into the bay so we can get out of this rain? Dr. Vasquez tried turning the key, but the engine wouldn't even turn over. Diego pushed the car by himself through the rain and into his work bay, his coveralls already soaked through, but his mind focused on the problem at hand. Under the fluorescent lights of his shop, Diego could see that Dr. Vasquez was even more distressed than she'd initially appeared. Her hands were shaking slightly, and there was an urgency in her movements that went beyond simple inconvenience. The surgery, Dr. Vasquez explained, checking her phone anxiously. It's a 7-year-old girl with a brain tumor. We've been planning this operation for weeks, coordinating with specialists from 3 different hospitals. If I don't get there... Diego felt his chest tighten. He thought of Carlos. Imagined some other father sitting in a hospital waiting room, counting on strangers to save his child's life. We'll get you there, Diego said with a certainty he didn't quite feel. Let me diagnose the problem first. Diego popped the hood and immediately saw the issue. The serpentine belt that drove multiple engine components had snapped completely, probably due to the age and stress of the stormy driving conditions. Without it, the alternator couldn't charge the battery, the water pump couldn't circulate coolant, and the power steering wouldn't function. It was a relatively simple fix if you had the right belt in stock. Good news and bad news, Diego said, emerging from under the hood. Good news is I know exactly what's wrong, broken serpentine belt. Bad news is I don't have the specific belt for a 2023 Lexus LS in stock, and with this storm, none of the parts stores are going to deliver today. Dr. Vasquez closed her eyes, and for a moment the confident professional facade cracked. The surgery can't wait. There's no one else available who specializes in pediatric neurosurgery. If we postpone, the tumor could grow to the point where... She didn't finish the sentence. Diego found himself thinking about impossible problems and creative solutions, the kind of mechanical ingenuity that his father had taught him years ago. He walked back to his parts inventory, scanning the shelves of belts, hoses, and components he'd accumulated over 8 years of running the shop. Dr. Vasquez, Diego called out, I might have an idea, it's unconventional, but it could work. He returned with 2 different serpentine belts, neither the exact match for the Lexus, but one slightly longer and one slightly shorter than the original specification. I can modify one of these belts to fit your car's pulley system. It won't be permanent, but it should get you to the hospital and back. Dr. Vasquez looked skeptical. Is that safe? For a short trip in an emergency, yes. For daily driving, no, but it'll hold long enough to get you where you need to go. Diego was already gathering his tools. The modification will take about 20 minutes. 20 minutes? Dr. Vasquez checked her phone again. If I leave here in 20 minutes, I can still make it on time. Diego nodded and immediately went to work. Using a combination of belt splicing techniques his father had taught him and some creative engineering with heat-shrinking materials, he began adapting the shorter belt to match the Lexus's exact specifications. It was delicate work. Too loose and the belt would slip, too tight and it would snap under pressure. Dr. Vasquez watched intently as Diego worked, occasionally answering calls from the hospital about surgical preparations and timing. Diego could hear the stress in her voice, the weight of knowing that a child's life hung in the balance of timing and technical precision. You know, Dr. Vasquez said during a quiet moment, I've been driving through this neighborhood for 3 years to get to the hospital, and I never noticed your shop before. Most people don't, Diego replied, carefully adjusting the belt tension. We're kind of tucked away back here. I mostly work on local cars, people who can't afford the dealership prices. How long have you been doing this? Learned from my father, took over the shop when he retired 8 years ago. It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills. Diego didn't mention that lately, it barely did that. After 18 minutes of precise work, Diego stepped back and wiped his hands. Let's fire her up and see if we're in business. Dr. Vasquez turned the key, and the Lexus engine came to life with a smooth purr. All the dashboard warning lights had disappeared, and the modified belt was running perfectly through the pulley system. "You did it," Dr. Vasquez said, relief flooding her voice. "How much do I owe you?" Diego looked at this woman who was rushing to save a child's life, thinking about the parents who were probably pacing hospital corridors right now, and made a decision that surprised even himself. "Nothing," Diego said. "Just get to that little girl." Dr. Vasquez stared at him in disbelief. "Nothing? But the parts, the labor, your time." "Consider it a professional courtesy, one parent to another." Diego opened the bay door as the rain finally began to lighten. "Drive carefully, and good luck with the surgery." Dr. Vasquez sat in her car for a moment longer, studying Diego's face as if trying to memorize it. "Diego Martinez," she said finally. "I won't forget this." As the black Lexus disappeared into the gray afternoon, Diego returned to his work on the Honda Civic, unaware that he had just set in motion a chain of events that would transform not only his own life, but the lives of everyone in his struggling community. 3 weeks later, that same black sedan would return to Martinez Auto Repair, but this time, Dr. Elena Vasquez wouldn't be coming alone. 3 weeks passed like a blur of ordinary days at Martinez Auto Repair. Diego had almost forgotten about the emergency surgery and the grateful doctor in the expensive sedan. Almost, but not quite. Sometimes, during quiet moments between customers, he found himself wondering if the little girl had made it through the operation, if Dr. Vasquez had managed to save another life with those skilled hands that had trembled so slightly in the storm. Business had been particularly slow since the weather turned colder. October in Millbrook brought early frosts and the kind of economic hibernation that hits small towns when tourist season ended and people started tightening their belts for winter. Diego had managed 3 oil changes, a brake job, and a transmission repair that barely covered the cost of parts. The envelope containing Carlos's acceptance letter still sat on the kitchen counter, a daily reminder of dreams that seemed to grow more impossible with each passing day. Diego was elbow-deep in the engine compartment of a 1998 Ford pickup, trying to diagnose a mysterious rattling sound when he heard the familiar purr of an expensive engine pulling into his lot. He didn't look up immediately, probably another lost driver looking for directions to the interstate. But something about the sound made him pause. He knew that engine. When he emerged from under the hood, wiping his hands on a greasy rag, Diego saw the black Lexus sedan parked exactly where it had been 3 weeks earlier. Dr. Elena Vasquez stepped out of the driver's seat, but she wasn't alone. 2 other people emerged from the car, a younger woman with auburn hair carrying what looked like legal documents, and an older man in an expensive overcoat who moved with the careful precision of someone accustomed to boardrooms and power. "Diego Martinez," Dr. Vasquez called out, her voice carrying the same warmth but with an underlying excitement that hadn't been there during the emergency. "I told you I wouldn't forget." Diego approached the group cautiously, suddenly aware of how he must look in his oil-stained coveralls, his hands still dirty from the morning's work. "Dr. Vasquez, how did the surgery go? The little girl?" "Perfect. Complete success. She's home now, playing violin again." Dr. Vasquez's smile was radiant. "Thanks to you getting me there on time." "I'm glad to hear that," Diego said, though he sensed there was more to this visit than a simple thank you. "What brings you back to my little corner of Millbrook?" The older man stepped forward, extending his hand with the confident gesture of someone accustomed to making first impressions count. "Mr. Martinez, my name is Jonathan Hartwell. I'm the director of Riverside Health Foundation. Dr. Vasquez has told me quite a story about what happened here 3 weeks ago." Diego shook his hand, confused. Riverside Health Foundation. He'd heard the name before, seen it on billboards and hospital wings throughout the region. One of the largest charitable organizations in the state, with resources that dwarfed anything in small-town Millbrook. "I'm not sure I understand," Diego said. The younger woman with auburn hair stepped forward. "My name is Catherine Mills, and I'm a social worker with the foundation. We've been researching community support systems, trying to understand how acts of kindness create ripple effects in underserved areas." Dr. Vasquez moved closer, her expression serious now. "Diego, after you fixed my car that day, I couldn't stop thinking about what you did. Not just the mechanical work, though that was brilliant, but the fact that you refused payment for an emergency repair that probably saved a child's life. Anyone would have done the same thing, Diego said, though even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. Most shops would have charged emergency rates for that kind of after-hours work. That's where you're wrong, Jonathan Hartwell said gently. We've been conducting a study of automotive repair shops throughout the region, documenting how businesses respond to emergency situations. Out of 43 shops we surveyed, you're the only one who provided free emergency service to a complete stranger. Diego felt a flush of embarrassment. It was just the right thing to do. Exactly, Catherine Mills said, opening her folder of documents. Which is why we'd like to talk to you about something that could change not just your life, but the lives of everyone in this community. Dr. Vasquez gestured toward Diego's small office, a cramped space behind the main work bay that served as both business headquarters and break room. Could we sit down for a few minutes? What we have to propose is going to sound impossible at first. Diego led them to his office, suddenly self-conscious about the folding chairs and card table that served as his desk. These people were clearly accustomed to conference rooms and leather furniture, not the improvised workspace of a struggling auto repair shop. Diego, Dr. Vasquez began once they were seated, how familiar are you with the concept of community anchor institutions? I'm not sure what you mean. Jonathan Hartwell leaned forward. Community anchors are local businesses or organizations that serve as stability points in underserved areas. They provide essential services, create local employment, and often become informal community support networks. Like your shop, Catherine Mills added. Dr. Vasquez told us that you don't just fix cars here. You extend payment plans to families who can't afford immediate repairs, you've taught basic automotive maintenance to teenagers in the neighborhood, and you've let people use your phone and bathroom when they're stranded. Diego shifted uncomfortably. Those weren't business strategies. They were just ways of being a decent neighbor. I suppose, but… What if, Dr. Vasquez interrupted gently, we told you that the Riverside Health Foundation wants to invest in community anchor institutions like yours? Not to change what you do, but to help you do it better and reach more people? Diego stared at them, trying to process what he was hearing. I don't understand. Invest how? Catherine Mills opened her folder and pulled out a thick document. The foundation has received a $12 million grant from the federal government to establish community resilience centers in underserved areas. These centers would provide multiple services: automotive repair, basic medical care, educational support, and emergency assistance, all coordinated through existing local businesses. We want to partner with Martinez Auto Repair, Jonathan Hartwell said directly, to create the first community resilience center in rural Millbrook. Diego felt the world spinning slightly around him. Partner how? Full facility renovation and expansion, Dr. Vasquez explained. We're talking about tripling your current space, adding state-of-the-art diagnostic equipment, and creating additional service areas for community programming. Plus, Catherine Mills added, funding for staff expansion. You'd be able to hire additional mechanics, a community coordinator, and even a part-time educational specialist to run programs for local youth. Diego's mind immediately went to the most obvious question: what would this cost me? Nothing, Jonathan Hartwell said simply. This is a grant-funded community investment. The foundation would handle all construction costs, equipment purchases, and initial staffing expenses. Your contribution would be your expertise, your community connections, and your commitment to the expanded mission. But why me? Diego asked. I'm just a small-town mechanic with barely enough business to keep the lights on. Dr. Vasquez smiled. Because 3 weeks ago, when faced with a choice between profit and principle, you chose principle. Because you've already been serving your community in ways that bigger, better-funded organizations haven't figured out how to do. Catherine Mills pulled out photographs from her folder, pictures of Diego's shop taken from the street, but also images of other community resilience centers that had been established in similar small towns. The transformations were dramatic. Modern facilities that looked more like community colleges than repair shops, with classroom spaces, computer labs, and medical clinics integrated seamlessly with expanded automotive service areas. The automotive repair component would remain the central focus, Jonathan Hartwell explained, but we'd add services that address other community needs: basic health screenings, GED preparation classes, job training programs, emergency financial assistance. And Dr. Vasquez added with a smile that suggested she'd been saving the best for last. Educational partnerships with regional colleges and universities. Students from programs like automotive technology, nursing, and education would come here for practical training, working alongside community members and local experts. Diego's breath caught. Educational partnerships? Full scholarship opportunities for local students, Catherine Mills confirmed, including specialized programs in automotive technology, healthcare support, and community development. The words hit Diego like a physical blow. Scholarship opportunities. Educational programs. Resources that could change everything for Carlos and dozens of other young people in Millbrook who had dreams bigger than their circumstances. This is... Diego started, then stopped, overwhelmed by the scope of what they were proposing. Overwhelming, Dr. Vasquez finished gently. We know. That's why we don't need an answer today. But, Diego, I want you to understand something. This opportunity exists because of what you did 3 weeks ago. Because you saw a stranger in trouble and chose to help without expecting anything in return. Jonathan Hartwell stood up, extending his hand again. Think about it, Mr. Martinez. But know that you've already proven you have exactly the kind of character and community commitment we're looking for in a partner. As the 3 visitors prepared to leave, Catherine Mills handed Diego a business card and a thick folder of information. Everything you need to know about the program is in there. Timeline, funding details, partnership agreements, everything. Dr. Vasquez was the last to speak. Diego, the little girl whose surgery I performed that day? Her name is Emma Chen. She's back to playing violin, just like your son. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest changes. After they left, Diego sat alone in his small office, staring at the folder that could transform his life and his community. 3 weeks ago, he fixed a stranger's car for free because it was the right thing to do. Now that same stranger was offering him opportunities he'd never dared to dream about. But as he opened the folder and began reading about community resilience centers, one thought kept running through his mind. If this was real, if this partnership could work, then maybe dreams weren't too big for small towns after all. Diego spent the entire evening reading through the folder Catherine Mills had left behind, spread across his kitchen table like pieces of a puzzle he couldn't quite assemble. The documents painted a picture of transformation that seemed too good to be true. Architectural plans showing his tiny auto repair shop expanded into a 12,000-square-foot community center. Budget projections that included salaries for 6 full-time employees, and partnership agreements with 3 regional universities. Carlos sat across from him, working on calculus homework but stealing glances at the papers that had consumed his father's attention since dinner. Dad, you've been staring at those documents for 3 hours. What's going on? Diego looked up at his son, realizing he hadn't said more than 10 words since the foundation representatives had left. Remember Dr. Vasquez? The woman whose car I fixed for free a few weeks ago? The surgeon who was rushing to save a little girl? She came back today. With some people from a big foundation. Diego gestured at the papers spread before him. They want to turn our shop into something called a community resilience center. Carlos set down his pencil, his full attention now focused on his father. What does that mean? Diego tried to explain what he himself was still trying to understand. It means they'd renovate and expand the shop, add medical services, educational programs, job training. They'd pay for everything. Construction, equipment, staff salaries. That sounds incredible. What's the catch? The question Diego had been asking himself all evening. I'm not sure there is one. That's what worries me. Carlos moved to sit beside his father, looking at the architectural drawings that showed familiar spaces transformed beyond recognition. Dad, look at this. They're planning computer labs, a health clinic, classroom spaces. This could help so many people in our neighborhood. Diego nodded, but his expression remained troubled. It could. But Carlos, I'm a mechanic. I fix cars and change oil. I don't know anything about running a community center or managing educational programs. You know about helping people, Carlos said quietly. You've been doing that your whole life. Before Diego could respond, his phone rang. Dr. Vasquez's name appeared on the screen, as if she'd sensed Diego's confusion from across town. Diego, I hope I'm not calling too late. I wanted to check in and see if you had any initial questions about the proposal. Dr. Vasquez, I appreciate everything you've shared with me, but I have to be honest. This feels overwhelming. I'm not sure I'm the right person for something this big. That's exactly why you are the right person, Dr. Vasquez replied without hesitation. Diego, can I tell you something about that day you fixed my car? I've been practicing medicine for 22 years. I've worked in hospitals where million-dollar equipment breaks down, and entire surgical schedules get disrupted because one component fails. But I've never seen anyone solve a complex mechanical problem as quickly and creatively as you did that afternoon. Diego felt heat rise in his cheeks. It was just a belt replacement. It was adaptive engineering under extreme time pressure. You took two incompatible parts and modified them to create a solution that didn't exist before. That's not just mechanical skill, that's systems thinking. I don't understand what you're getting at. Dr. Vasquez's voice grew more passionate. Community development requires exactly the same skills you used that day. You have to look at existing resources, identify what's missing, and create innovative solutions that connect people with services they need. You've already been doing that for years. Diego found himself thinking about the families who came to his shop not just for car repairs, but for advice, support, and sometimes just a listening ear. Mrs. Patterson, whose old Honda had needed monthly repairs but who couldn't afford a newer car. Tommy Chen, the teenager he'd taught basic automotive maintenance to keep him off the streets after school. The Rodriguez family, who'd been making small payments on their transmission repair for 8 months without Diego ever charging them interest. Diego, Dr. Vasquez continued, I need to tell you something else. The foundation didn't choose your shop randomly. We've been studying community support networks throughout the region for 2 years. Your business appears in more social service referral networks than any other single location in Millbrook. This is different. It's bigger, but it's not different. And Dad? Carlos smiled. Remember what Mom used to say about taking on challenges that scare you? Diego felt tears prick his eyes. Rosa had always told him that the best opportunities were the ones that felt slightly impossible. That growth only happened when you stretched beyond what felt comfortable. That if it doesn't scare you a little, it's probably not worth doing, Diego finished. Exactly, and this scholarship program? It could help kids like Tommy Chen go to college instead of dropping out. It could give people like Mrs. Patterson access to health care they can't afford otherwise. It could turn Millbrook into the kind of place where young people choose to stay instead of having to leave to find opportunities. As Diego prepared for bed that night, he realized that Dr. Vasquez had been right about one thing. He'd already been serving as an informal community anchor for years. The question now was whether he had the courage to step into a role that would make that service official and much more visible. Tomorrow, he would call Catherine Mills and schedule the university site visit, not because he'd made a final decision, but because some opportunities were too important to dismiss without careful consideration. For the first time since Rosa's death, Diego Martinez was contemplating a future that extended far beyond simple survival. The university representatives arrived on a crisp Thursday morning in 2 separate vehicles, a sleek BMW from Riverside Technical Institute and a practical Honda Pilot from Millbrook Community College. Diego had spent the previous evening cleaning his shop with the kind of nervous energy that came from knowing your entire future might depend on the next few hours. Dr. Patricia Williams from Riverside Technical stepped out of the BMW first, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to evaluating potential partnerships. Behind her emerged Professor James Chen from the Automotive Technology Department, younger and more casually dressed, carrying a tablet and what looked like technical specifications. From the Honda Pilot came Dr. Rachel Morrison, president of Millbrook Community College, and Maria Santos, the college's director of continuing education. Diego recognized Dr. Morrison from newspaper articles about local education initiatives, but he'd never imagined the college president would be standing in his auto repair bay. Mr. Martinez, Dr. Williams said, extending her hand, thank you for agreeing to meet with us. The Riverside Health Foundation has shared some very impressive information about your work here. Diego wiped his hands on a clean rag before shaking hands with each visitor. I'm not sure how impressive it is, but I appreciate you taking the time to visit. Professor Chen was already walking around the perimeter of the shop, taking notes on his tablet. The foundation's architectural plans show this space expanding significantly. Have you had a chance to review the proposed layout for the educational components? I have, Diego replied, pulling out the folder of documents that had become his constant companion. "But I have to admit, some of it is beyond my expertise. I understand automotive training, but the healthcare education components, the community development programs, that's new territory for me." Dr. Morrison smiled warmly. "That's exactly why partnerships work, Mr. Martinez. You bring deep community knowledge and practical expertise. We bring educational infrastructure and professional development resources." Maria Santos opened her own folder, revealing curriculum outlines and program descriptions. The community college is particularly excited about the possibility of offering on-site GED preparation and basic trades training. We've been trying to reach underserved populations in rural areas like Millbrook for years. "What would that look like practically?" Diego asked. "Evening classes held right here in your expanded facility," Professor Chen explained. "Students could work on GED requirements, while also learning basic automotive maintenance, small engine repair, or other practical skills that translate directly to employment opportunities." Dr. Williams pulled out her tablet and showed Diego photographs of similar programs at other community resilience centers. "The model we've developed allows students to earn stackable credentials, certificates that build toward associate degrees, which can then transfer to four-year programs." Diego studied the images of young people working on engines while simultaneously attending computer-based classes, of healthcare workers providing basic services in automotive shop settings, of community members gathering for everything from job fairs to health screenings. "This all looks incredible," Diego said, "but I need to be honest about something. I'm concerned about what this might mean for the people who already depend on my shop." Dr. Morrison leaned forward. "What kind of concerns?" Diego had been wrestling with this question since the Foundation's first visit. "Right now, I'm the only full-service automotive repair option in Millbrook that offers payment plans, emergency services, and repairs at cost for families who can't afford market rates. If this shop becomes a community center with university partnerships and government funding, will I still be able to provide those services?" The four visitors exchanged glances that suggested this was exactly the kind of question they'd been hoping he would ask. "Mr. Martinez," Dr. Williams said carefully, "that's a crucial concern, and it speaks to exactly why you're the right person for this partnership. The Foundation specifically chose your location because of your existing commitment to serving underserved populations." Professor Chen looked up from his notes. "The Community Resilience Center model actually expands your ability to provide sliding scale services. With Foundation funding and university partnerships, you'd have resources to offer more comprehensive support than you can provide alone." "But there would be oversight," Diego said. "It wasn't a question. Reporting requirements, performance metrics, accountability to funding sources." Maria Santos nodded. "There would be. The Foundation and university partners would need regular reports on program outcomes, participant demographics, and financial management." "Which means," Dr. Morrison added, "some of the informal, case-by-case decision-making you do now would need to be formalized into consistent policies." Diego felt his stomach tighten. The bureaucratic structure they were describing sounded efficient and professional, but it also sounded like it might eliminate the flexibility that made his shop a true community resource. When Mrs. Patterson needed break work but couldn't pay until her disability check arrived, Diego didn't require paperwork or approval processes. He just did the work and trusted that payment would come eventually. "Can I ask you about something specific?" Diego said. "Last month, a family came to me with a minivan that needed $800 in transmission work. They had 3 kids and were already behind on rent. I did the repair and told them to pay me back when they could, $20 a month if that's all they could manage. Would that kind of arrangement be possible under the Community Resilience Center model?" Dr. Williams and Dr. Morrison exchanged a look that lasted several seconds too long. "That's the kind of community-responsive service we want to support," Dr. Williams said finally. "But it would need to be structured with informal assistance programs with proper documentation and eligibility criteria." "Meaning?" "Meaning the family would need to apply for sliding scale services, provide income verification, and work with a social worker to develop a payment plan that meets federal guidelines for assistance programs." Diego felt something cold settle in his chest. How long would that process take? "Typically 4 to 6 weeks for initial approval," Maria Santos replied. "This family needed their van fixed that day so the father could get to work," Diego said quietly. 6 weeks without transportation would have cost him his job. Professor Chen looked up from his tablet. "Mr. Martinez, I understand your concern, But federal funding comes with accountability requirements. We can't just provide services without proper documentation and oversight. Dr. Morrison seemed to sense Diego's growing discomfort. There would be some emergency assistance protocols that could expedite services in urgent situations. What would those look like? You could authorize up to $500 in emergency services per month without pre-approval, as long as you documented the circumstances and initiated the formal assistance application within 72 hours. Diego did quick mental math. $500 might cover basic repairs, but it wouldn't address major mechanical problems. And requiring families in crisis to navigate application processes and income verification seemed to miss the point of community support entirely. I need to ask something else, Diego said. The people who use my shop now, they trust me because I'm their neighbor, because I've been here for 8 years, because I understand their situations. If I become part of a university system with formal programs and federal oversight, will I still be able to make decisions based on what I know about individual families? Dr. Williams hesitated. Your local knowledge would certainly inform program policies, but individual service decisions would need to align with established guidelines and eligibility criteria. Guidelines developed by whom? The Foundation in partnership with university administrators and federal program officers. Diego looked around his small shop, imagining it transformed into the impressive facility shown in the architectural plans. More space, better equipment, expanded services, everything looked positive on paper. But something about the conversation was making him realize that growth and improvement might come at the cost of the very qualities that made his shop valuable to the community. Professor Chen seemed to notice his hesitation. Mr. Martinez, these structures exist to ensure that programs serve as many people as possible in the most equitable way. Informal arrangements, like you're describing, while well-intentioned, can't be scaled or replicated. But what if scaling and replicating aren't the most important goals? Diego asked. What if the most important goal is making sure that when someone in this community has a problem, they know there's someone who will help them figure out a solution? The question hung in the air for a moment. Diego could see the university representatives processing his concern, but he could also see that their institutional perspectives made it difficult for them to understand why flexibility might be more valuable than consistency. Dr. Morrison spoke first. Mr. Martinez, we're not asking you to abandon your community-centered approach. We're asking you to work within systems that ensure sustainability and accountability. I understand that, Diego replied. But I'm trying to figure out whether those systems would allow me to be the kind of neighbor my community needs. As the university representatives prepared to leave, promising follow-up conversations and additional program details, Diego realized that the opportunity they were offering was both exactly what he'd dreamed of and potentially the end of everything that made his work meaningful. The question he faced wasn't just whether he was capable of managing a community resilience center. It was whether he was willing to trade the informal, relationship-based approach that had defined his work for the formal, systematic approach that would bring resources and opportunities to his community. That evening, as Diego sat in his kitchen reviewing the notes from the university visit, Carlos found him staring out the window at their quiet neighborhood. "Dad, you look like someone who's trying to solve an impossible problem." Diego turned to his son. "Maybe I am. The university partnership could provide incredible opportunities for you and other kids in Millbrook, but it might also change what I'm able to do for families who need help right now. Can't you do both?" "I'm not sure, and I'm not sure which choice would be the right one." Diego spent 3 sleepless nights wrestling with the university partnership proposal before he realized he was approaching the problem the wrong way. On Sunday morning, as he watched Carlos practice violin in their small living room, an idea began to form, not about choosing between the Foundation's vision and his community's needs, but about creating something that honored both. He called Dr. Vasquez first, knowing that the surgeon would understand the importance of finding solutions that addressed root causes rather than just symptoms. "Diego, I was hoping to hear from you. How did the university visit go?" "It was enlightening," Diego said carefully. "Dr. Vasquez, can I ask you something? When you're developing a treatment plan for a complex medical case, do you ever find that the standard protocols don't quite fit the patient's specific situation?" "All the time. That's when medicine becomes an art as well as a science. Why do you ask?" Diego took a deep breath. "I think the Community Resilience Center model, as currently designed, might be the wrong treatment for Millbrook-specific conditions. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I'm listening. The university representatives were wonderful, and their programs could help a lot of people. But the bureaucratic requirements would eliminate the very qualities that make my shop effective as a community resource. I'd gain the ability to serve more people systematically, but I'd lose the ability to serve individuals responsively. What are you thinking? What if we modified the model? What if instead of creating one large community resilience center with formal programs and federal oversight, we created a network of smaller community anchors that could work together while maintaining their individual flexibility? Dr. Vasquez was quiet for a moment. Explain what that would look like. Diego walked to his window, looking out at the businesses that dotted Millbrook's small downtown. Mrs. Patterson runs a small diner 3 blocks from here. She already extends credit to families who can't afford meals. And she knows more about who's struggling with what than any social services agency. What if we helped her expand her space to include basic community services? Maybe a food pantry, a meeting room for support groups, or a place where visiting nurses could hold health screenings. And Tommy Chen's father runs the corner market, Diego continued, his excitement building. He's already the person people go to when they need help connecting with services or finding job opportunities. What if we helped him create a community information center with computers, internet access, and someone who could help with things like job applications and benefits paperwork? You're talking about distributed community support rather than centralized services. Exactly. Each business would maintain its core function and community relationships, while adding services that match its owner's strengths and community connections. The auto shop would focus on transportation-related needs, the diner would handle food security and gathering spaces, the market would provide information and resource connections. Dr. Vasquez sounded intrigued. How would this work with the educational partnerships? Diego had been thinking about that too. Instead of bringing university students to one large facility, we could create rotation programs where they experience different aspects of community work at different locations. Nursing students could spend time at the diner learning about nutrition and community health. Automotive technology students could work at my shop. Business students could help develop sustainable practices for small community anchors. That's actually brilliant, Dr. Vasquez said. It would give students more diverse experience while preserving the community connections that make each location effective. But Dr. Vasquez, I need to be honest. This approach would be harder to manage and measure than the original Community Resilience Center model. There would be more moving parts, more relationships to coordinate, and less standardization. There would also be more resilience, Dr. Vasquez replied. If one location faced problems, the others could continue operating. And you're right that it would preserve the informal, relationship-based support that makes community anchors effective. Diego felt a surge of hope. Do you think the foundation would consider this kind of modification? I think they'd be very interested, especially if you could demonstrate how it would serve more people with less infrastructure investment. But Diego, proposing an alternative model means you'd be taking on a leadership role in designing something that's never been tried before. The weight of that responsibility was both thrilling and terrifying. I've been thinking about that. If we're going to propose a distributed model, we need input from the other potential community anchors. This can't be something I design alone. What's your next step? I want to call a community meeting, invite local business owners, community leaders, people who've been doing informal support work for years. Present the foundation's original proposal and see if anyone else is interested in exploring alternatives. Dr. Vasquez was quiet for a moment. Diego, you realize what you're proposing could change how community development works throughout the region? If this distributed model succeeds, it could become a template for rural areas everywhere. Or it could fail spectacularly and prove that the traditional centralized model is the only practical approach. True, are you willing to take that risk? Diego thought about Mrs. Patterson, who had been serving meals to struggling families for 15 years without any formal funding or recognition. About Mr. Chen, who had connected more people with jobs and services than the county's official employment office. About all the informal community supporters who had been doing this work long before foundations and universities discovered the value of community anchors. Dr. Vasquez, these people have been taking that risk their entire lives. They've been serving their community without guaranteed funding or institutional support because they believed it was the right thing to do. If I'm not willing to take a risk to preserve and expand what they've built, then I don't deserve to be part of their community. When do you want to hold this meeting? On Cone. As soon as possible. Would you be willing to attend? And maybe bring Catherine Mills and Jonathan Hartwell? I think people would be more likely to participate if they could hear about the Foundation's resources and goals directly. Absolutely. Diego, I have to tell you, this conversation has been one of the most exciting I've had since we started the Community Resilience Center initiative. You're thinking about community development in ways that could revolutionize how we approach rural support systems. After ending the call with Dr. Vasquez, Diego began making a list of people to invite to the community meeting. Mrs. Patterson from the diner, definitely. Mr. Chen from the corner market. Pastor Williams from the Baptist Church, who had been running an informal food pantry out of the church basement for years. Maria Gonzalez, who had started a community garden in the vacant lot behind the old gas station. Jake Morrison, the retired teacher who had been tutoring struggling students out of his home. Each of these people had been serving their community in their own way, using their own resources and relationships to address needs that formal systems often missed. The question was whether they would be interested in coordinating their efforts and accepting foundation support that could expand their impact. Diego spent the rest of the day visiting each potential participant personally. He wanted to explain the opportunity face to face, to answer questions and address concerns before asking anyone to commit to attending a formal meeting with foundation representatives. The responses surprised him with their enthusiasm. Mrs. Patterson immediately saw how expanded space and resources could help her serve more families. Mr. Chen was excited about the possibility of creating a community information center that could help people navigate everything from healthcare enrollment to job training programs. Pastor Williams talked about the potential for coordinating services across different community anchors to ensure that no one fell through the cracks. But it was Maria Gonzalez who asked the most important question. Diego, this sounds wonderful, but what happens if the foundation decides our approach is too complicated or risky? What if they withdraw their support? Then we continue doing what we've always done, Diego replied. We take care of our neighbors with whatever resources we have. The foundation's support would help us do more, but it wouldn't make us dependent on outside approval for everything we do. By Sunday evening, Diego had commitments from 8 community members to attend a meeting the following Thursday. He called Dr. Vasquez to confirm that foundation representatives would be available, then spent the evening preparing a presentation that would explain both the original Community Resilience Center model and his proposed distributed alternative. As he worked on the presentation, Carlos sat at the kitchen table working on his own project, a research paper about community support systems for his sociology class. Dad, can I ask you something about this meeting you're planning? Of course. Are you nervous about proposing something different from what the foundation originally had in mind? Diego looked up from his notes, terrified. But you're doing it anyway. Sometimes the most important conversations are the ones that scare you the most. Carlos smiled. Mom would be proud of you. She always said that the best solutions came from listening to people who were actually doing the work, not from people who were just studying it. I hope she'd be proud. I hope this works. Even if it doesn't work exactly the way you're imagining, it's already working, Carlos said. You've gotten 8 people who have been working alone to start thinking about working together. That's something. As Diego finished his presentation that night, he realized that Carlos was right. Regardless of whether the foundation accepted his proposed modifications, the process of bringing community supporters together to envision coordinated action was already creating something valuable. Thursday's meeting would determine whether that something could grow into a sustainable model for community development, or whether Diego would need to choose between accepting the foundation's original proposal and continuing to work alone. Either way, he was no longer thinking like someone who fixed individual problems as they arose. He was thinking like someone who could help design systems that prevented problems from occurring in the first place. Thursday evening arrived with the kind of autumn chill that made Diego grateful for the industrial heaters in his auto repair bay. He had arranged folding chairs in a circle, transforming his workspace into an impromptu community center for what might be the most important meeting Millbrook had seen in decades. Dr. Vasquez arrived first, accompanied by Catherine Mills and Jonathan Hartwell from the foundation. They carried briefcases and tablets, but Diego noticed they had dressed more casually than during their previous visits, khakis and sweaters instead of business suits, as if they understood this meeting required a different kind of formality. Mrs. Patterson came next, her silver hair pulled back in the practical bun she wore during dinner rushes at the diner. She carried a thermos of coffee and a plate of homemade cookies, because feeding people was as natural to her as breathing. Behind her walked Mr. Chen, who had closed the corner market early to attend. He brought his teenage son Tommy, now 16, and working part-time while finishing high school. Pastor Williams arrived with Maria Gonzalez, the two of them deep in conversation about coordinating the church food pantry with the community garden project. Jake Morrison, the retired teacher, came carrying a folder thick with notes about literacy programs he'd been running informally for adult learners. The last to arrive was someone Diego hadn't expected, Dr. Rachel Morrison from Millbrook Community College, who had driven over after hearing about the meeting from the foundation representatives. "I hope you don't mind my crashing your community gathering," Dr. Morrison said to Diego. "When Catherine told me you were proposing modifications to the Community Resilience Center model, I knew I needed to hear this firsthand." Diego looked around at the diverse group now filling his auto repair bay: foundation executives, community college administrators, small business owners, retirees, and teenagers. It felt like the kind of conversation that could either create something extraordinary or fall apart under the weight of competing interests and conflicting perspectives. "Thank you all for coming," Diego began, his voice steadier than he felt. "I asked you here because I think we have an opportunity to create something unprecedented in Millbrook." "Dr. Vasquez, would you start by explaining the Foundation's original Community Resilience Center proposal?" Dr. Vasquez stood and outlined the plan she had presented to Diego weeks earlier: a single expanded facility offering integrated services, university partnerships, and comprehensive community support. She showed architectural drawings and budget projections, emphasizing the potential for serving hundreds of community members through coordinated programming. When she finished, Jonathan Hartwell added context about similar centers in other rural communities. "The model has been successful in 12 locations across 3 states. We've documented significant improvements in educational outcomes, healthcare access, and economic development." Mrs. Patterson raised her hand. "It sounds wonderful, but I have a question. In these other communities, what happened to the small businesses and informal support networks that were already serving people?" Catherine Mills consulted her tablet. "In most cases, they became integrated into the Community Resilience Center structure, or transitioned to serving populations outside the center's reach." "Meaning they closed or moved away," Mr. Chen said quietly. "Not necessarily," Jonathan Hartwell replied. "Some found new roles within the expanded service delivery system." Diego could see the skepticism on several faces around the circle. These were people who had built their community connections over decades, who understood that relationships couldn't be easily transferred to new institutional frameworks. "That brings me to the alternative I wanted to discuss," Diego said, moving to the center of the circle. "What if instead of creating one centralized facility, we developed a network of connected community anchors that could coordinate services while maintaining their individual relationships and flexibility?" He outlined his vision for the distributed model: Mrs. Patterson's diner expanding to include community meeting space and basic health services, Mr. Chen's market adding computer access and resource coordination, the church integrating its food pantry with broader support services, the community garden becoming a center for nutrition education and job training. Each location would focus on what it already does well while adding complementary services, Diego explained. University students would rotate through different sites to get diverse experience. Foundation funding would support expansion and coordination rather than replacement. Jake Morrison leaned forward. "How would this work practically? Who would coordinate between the different locations?" "That's something we'd need to figure out together," Diego admitted. "Maybe a rotating coordination role, maybe a shared position funded by the foundation. The key is that decisions about services and priorities would be made by the people who are actually providing the support." Pastor Williams spoke up. "I like the idea of coordination without losing autonomy. But Diego, wouldn't this approach be more expensive and complicated to manage than a single facility?" Dr. Morrison had been taking notes throughout the discussion. "Actually, it might be more cost-effective. Renovating and expanding existing spaces would likely cost less than building one large new facility, and you'd have multiple revenue streams instead of dependence on a single operation." Tommy Chen, who had been quietly listening, raised his hand. "Can I say something? I've been getting help from different people here for years. Tutoring from Mr. Morrison, after-school work at Diego's shop, meals at Mrs. Patterson's when my family was struggling. What made it work was that I could go to whoever I needed help from without filling out forms or proving I qualified. If you turn this into a big program with applications and waiting lists, you'll lose that. His observation created a moment of silence that felt like recognition. The adults in the room were debating institutional structures and funding mechanisms. But Tommy had identified the human element that made community support effective. Dr. Vasquez broke the silence. Tommy, that's exactly the insight we need to hear. The Foundation's goal is to support effective community care, not to bureaucratize it. If the distributed model can preserve responsive relationships while expanding capacity, that's worth exploring. But, Catherine Mills added, we'd need to document outcomes and ensure accountability for Foundation investments. How would we measure success across multiple locations with different focuses? Maria Gonzalez had been quiet throughout most of the discussion, but now she spoke with the authority of someone who had been organizing community resources for years. Success looks like people getting the help they need when they need it. It looks like young people like Tommy having multiple adults in their lives who care about their futures. It looks like families not having to choose between fixing their car and buying groceries. Those are important outcomes, Jonathan Hartwell said, but they're difficult to quantify in ways that satisfy Foundation reporting requirements. Diego felt the conversation reaching a critical point. The community members clearly supported the distributed approach, but the Foundation representatives were expressing legitimate concerns about accountability and measurement. What if we propose a pilot program, Diego suggested, 6 months of implementing the distributed model with 3 community anchors, My Shop, Mrs. Patterson's Diner, and Mr. Chen's Market. We document everything: services provided, people served, coordination challenges, cost efficiencies. At the end of 6 months, we evaluate whether it's working better than traditional approaches. Dr. Morrison nodded enthusiastically. The community college could provide evaluation support and data collection assistance. We could also begin developing the educational partnerships during the pilot phase. Mrs. Patterson looked around the circle. If we're going to try this, we need to be honest about something. All of us have been doing community support work without much outside help for years. If Foundation funding comes with strings that prevent us from helping people the way we think is best, we're not going to accept it. And if the pilot fails, Mr. Chen added, we need assurance that we won't be worse off than we are now. Dr. Vasquez exchanged glances with her Foundation colleagues. Those are fair concerns. What would you need to feel comfortable moving forward with the pilot program? Jake Morrison spoke first. Guaranteed autonomy over day-to-day operations. Foundation funding could support expansion and coordination, but individual sites would maintain control over how they serve their community members. Clear parameters for what success looks like, Pastor Williams added, developed jointly by community anchors and Foundation representatives. And honest evaluation, Maria Gonzalez concluded. If the distributed model doesn't work better than traditional approaches, we'll admit it and consider alternatives. Diego looked around the circle at faces that reflected cautious optimism mixed with determination. So we're talking about a 6-month pilot program with 3 community anchors, joint evaluation criteria, and shared decision-making about whether to continue. With the understanding, Catherine Mills said carefully that if the pilot succeeds, the Foundation would want to expand the model to other rural communities. And if it fails, Jonathan Hartwell added, we'd need to return to discussing the original Community Resilience Center proposal. Tommy Chen raised his hand again. What happens to the scholarships and university partnerships during the pilot? Dr. Morrison smiled. Those would begin immediately. Pilot or no pilot, the educational partnerships benefit the community regardless of which service delivery model we ultimately adopt. As the meeting wound down, Diego realized they had accomplished something he hadn't dared hope for. A room full of people with different backgrounds and interests had found common ground around shared values. The details would need to be negotiated, contracts would need to be written, and coordination mechanisms would need to be developed. But the fundamental agreement was in place. The most ambitious community development experiment in Millbrook's history would begin in 30 days, and Diego Martinez, the invisible mechanic who had fixed a stranger's car for free, would be at the center of it all. The first month of the pilot program tested every assumption Diego had made about community coordination. What looked simple in theory, 3 established businesses adding complementary services while maintaining their core operations, proved dizzyingly complex in practice. Each morning brought new challenges that required solutions no textbook had ever addressed. Mrs. Patterson's diner became the pilot's first success story and its most instructive failure. The addition of a community health screening area in her expanded back room drew 37 people in the first 2 weeks, more than the county health department had served in the entire previous month. Families appreciated being able to get blood pressure checks and basic health consultations while enjoying Patricia's famous Thursday meatloaf special. But the integration of health services with food service created unexpected complications. The visiting nurse practitioner, Dr. Sarah Kim, arrived for her Tuesday morning clinic to find the health screening area occupied by 3 elderly men playing dominoes and discussing their various medical complaints with the expertise of people who had been managing chronic conditions for decades. I tried to explain that I needed the space for actual medical appointments, Dr. Kim told Diego during their weekly coordination meeting, but these gentlemen informed me that they had been holding their informal health support group in Patricia's back room for over a year, and that Tuesday mornings were their regular time. Diego looked at Mrs. Patterson, who was trying not to smile. "What did you do?" "I suggested that Dr. Kim might benefit from listening to their conversation," Mrs. Patterson said. "Turns out Harold Martinez has been managing his diabetes better than most of her patients with formal medical care. And Frank Chen has developed a mobility routine for his arthritis that's more effective than anything his physical therapist recommended." Dr. Kim nodded reluctantly. "They've essentially created a peer support network that provides better ongoing care than I can offer in monthly visits. But it doesn't fit any standard model for healthcare delivery." "So what's the solution?" Diego asked. "I started holding my appointments in the main dining area instead," Dr. Kim said. "Privacy isn't ideal, but community integration seems to be more valuable than clinical separation. And the peer support group has become unofficial health educators for other community members." The situation at Mr. Chen's Corner Market presented different challenges. The addition of computer terminals and job search assistants had attracted teenagers who treated the space like an unofficial after-school program, elderly residents who needed help with everything from email to online banking, and job seekers who required intensive support with applications and interview preparation. "The problem isn't demand," Mr. Chen explained to Diego during a site visit. "The problem is that everyone needs different types of help at the same time. Yesterday, I had Mrs. Garcia trying to video chat with her granddaughter in California while Tommy and his friends were working on college applications. And meanwhile, 3 adults were waiting for help with unemployment benefit renewals." Diego watched the organized chaos of Mr. Chen's expanded market. Customers moved between grocery shopping, computer access, and informal consultations with Mr. Chen, who seemed to manage multiple conversations simultaneously, while keeping track of inventory and operating the cash register. "How are you handling it?" "I've started assigning volunteer hours to the teenagers," Mr. Chen said. "They help elderly customers with basic computer tasks in exchange for letters of recommendation and job references. It's working better than any formal tutoring program." "And the adults who need more intensive job search support?" "Jake Morrison comes in Thursday afternoon specifically to work with job seekers. He's better at resume writing and interview preparation than any employment counselor the county ever sent us." The innovation that emerged from necessity impressed Diego more than any planned program could have. Mr. Chen had created an intergenerational support system where teenagers developed teaching skills while elderly residents gained technology access, and experienced community members provided expertise that formal social services couldn't match. But the pilot's greatest test came during its 3rd week, when the Rodriguez family faced a crisis that revealed both the strengths and limitations of the distributed approach. Roberto Rodriguez's work truck broke down on a Sunday evening, threatening his ability to make Monday morning construction jobs that provided the family's only income. Simultaneously, his 8-year-old daughter Emma developed symptoms that suggested pneumonia, requiring immediate medical attention. Under the old system, the family would have faced impossible choices: emergency room fees they couldn't afford, or automotive repair costs that would consume grocery money for the month. Under the new pilot program, they discovered that community anchors could coordinate to address multiple crises simultaneously. Diego opened his shop on Sunday evening to diagnose the truck problem, a fuel pump failure that required overnight parts delivery. Mrs. Patterson called Dr. Kim to arrange an evening health consultation at the diner, where Emma could be examined while the family ate dinner. Mr. Chen contacted Jake Morrison, who drove to Diego's shop to help Roberto apply for emergency assistance funds while Diego worked on the truck. The coordination required 15 phone calls and 4 different people giving up their Sunday evening, Diego told Dr. Vasquez during their weekly check-in. But by Monday morning, Roberto was back at work, Emma was on appropriate medication, and the family had a payment plan for expenses that fit their budget. Could a centralized community resilience center have responded as quickly? Dr. Vasquez asked. Probably not. The distributed model allows for immediate response because someone is always available, even outside normal operating hours. But it also requires relationships and trust that take years to develop. Dr. Morrison from the community college had been documenting these coordination challenges and successes for the pilot evaluation. Her weekly reports captured both quantitative data, number of people served, types of services provided, cost per service delivery, and qualitative observations about community response and program adaptability. Okay. What we're seeing, quote, Dr. Morrison told Diego during a site visit, is that the distributed model serves more people per dollar invested than traditional approaches, but it requires a different kind of professional development for community anchors. What do you mean? You've all become systems coordinators without formal training in coordination. Mrs. Patterson is essentially running a community health program. Mr. Chen is managing workforce development services, and you're coordinating crisis response across multiple sectors. Diego had been feeling the weight of that expanded responsibility. Managing automotive repairs was straightforward. Cars had problems, and problems had solutions. Managing community coordination meant dealing with human complexities that couldn't be fixed with the right tools and enough time. The Foundation representatives are asking whether this coordination role is sustainable long-term, Dr. Morrison continued. Whether community anchors can manage expanded responsibilities without burning out or compromising their core businesses. The question had been keeping Diego awake at night. The pilot was succeeding in terms of community impact, but it was also requiring 60-hour work weeks and emotional energy he hadn't anticipated. Mrs. Patterson was experiencing similar pressure, trying to balance restaurant operations with community health programming. Mr. Chen was managing his market while providing services that required social work expertise he was developing through trial and error. What do you think? Diego asked Dr. Morrison. I think you're proving that community anchors can coordinate complex services more effectively than centralized institutions. But I also think you need additional support, training, backup systems, and probably additional staffing to make this sustainable. That evening, Diego called an emergency meeting of the 3 pilot anchors. They gathered in Mrs. Patterson's expanded back room, surrounded by the evidence of their success, appointment schedules, service logs, and thank you notes from community members whose lives had been improved by the coordinated support. We need to talk honestly, Diego began, about whether this is working for us as well as it's working for the community. Mrs. Patterson spoke first. I love what we're accomplishing, but I'm exhausted. I'm trying to be a restaurant owner, a community health coordinator, and a crisis responder simultaneously. Mr. Chen nodded. Same here, the job search assistance is helping people, but I don't have formal training in workforce development. I'm learning as I go, which means sometimes I don't know if I'm giving people the best advice. Diego looked at his partners in this experiment. So what do we need to make this sustainable? Training, Mrs. Patterson said immediately. I need to understand healthcare coordination better if I'm going to keep offering these services. Backup support, Mr. Chen added. When I'm dealing with a family crisis or a complex job search case, I need someone else who can handle the basic computer assistance and grocery shopping. And boundaries, Diego concluded. We need to figure out what services we can realistically provide and what should be referred to other resources. As they talked through solutions, Diego realized they were essentially redesigning community support from the ground up, learning through experimentation what worked and what didn't. It was messier than traditional approaches, but it was also more responsive to actual community needs. The question was whether the Foundation would see their challenges as problems to be solved or failures to be avoided. The transformation began quietly, almost imperceptibly, like the way dawn changes the sky before you realize it's no longer night. Diego first noticed it during the pilot program's 4th month, when he realized he hadn't had to coordinate an emergency response in over 2 weeks. Not because emergencies had stopped happening, but because the community had begun anticipating and preventing them. It started with Mrs. Garcia, the elderly woman who had been struggling with her video calls to family in California. Instead of waiting for computer problems to become crises, Tommy Chen had begun stopping by her house every Sunday afternoon to check her internet connection and update her devices. He'd assigned himself this task without being asked, understanding that prevention was more efficient than repeated emergency assistance. The teenagers have started doing this on their own, Mr. Chen told Diego during their monthly coordination meeting. They've divided up the elderly residents who need regular technology support. No one told them to do this. They just saw that weekly check-ins prevented most of the computer emergencies that were taking up so much time at the market. Absolutely. The training center model would expand your current operations, not replace them. You'd continue doing everything you're doing now, but you'd also be teaching other communities how to develop similar networks. Mr. Chen looked skeptical. Teaching other communities sounds like a full-time job by itself. How would we manage training responsibilities along with everything else we're already doing? Dr. Morrison smiled. That's where the university partnerships become crucial. Students and faculty from community colleges and four-year institutions would staff the training programs, with community anchors serving as expert practitioners and mentors. Tommy Chen, now 17 and working part-time at all 3 pilot locations while completing his senior year, spoke up. So instead of young people having to leave Millbrook to find educational and career opportunities would come to Millbrook. Exactly, Jonathan Hartwell confirmed. We're talking about transforming rural communities from places that export their talent to places that attract and develop talent. Diego looked around the room at faces that reflected excitement mixed with disbelief. 6 months ago, these were people who felt forgotten by economic development initiatives designed for urban areas. Now they were being asked to lead a national model for rural community revitalization. There's one more component I haven't mentioned, Catherine Mills said, consulting her notes. The national initiative includes full scholarship funding for community anchor staff and their family members to pursue higher education while remaining in their communities. Distance learning, intensive summer programs, and practitioner-based degree paths designed for working adults. Diego felt tears prick his eyes. Carlos, now halfway through his senior year of high school, had been accepted to 3 different music programs, but had delayed his decision pending the pilot program's outcome. Full scholarship funding would eliminate the financial barriers that had seemed insurmountable just a year ago. But more than that, it would allow Carlos to pursue his education while remaining connected to the community development work that had become central to both their lives. The music therapy program at Riverside University had expressed interest in developing a rural community arts therapy track based on Carlos's work, integrating musical education with community support services. I need to ask something important, Diego said. This national program sounds incredible, but what happens if the political winds change? If federal funding gets cut, or priorities shift? Are we building something sustainable, or something dependent on continued government support? Jonathan Hartwell nodded approvingly. That's the right question, and it's why the distributed model is so valuable. Each community anchor maintains its core business operations that can function independently of federal funding. The additional services and coordination activities are supported by foundation grants and federal programs, but they're additions to sustainable base operations, not replacements for them. Dr. Vasquez, who had been quietly observing the discussion, finally spoke. Diego, do you remember what you told me when you fixed my car that night? You said you were just doing what anyone would do, but you were wrong. You were doing what everyone should do, but most people don't know how to do. What you've created here, she continued, is a model for how communities can take care of themselves and each other. The national program isn't about scaling up your specific solutions, it's about teaching other communities how to develop their own locally appropriate solutions using your coordination principles. As the meeting concluded with plans for implementation timelines and training program development, Diego found himself thinking about the chain of events that had led to this moment. Dr. Vasquez's broken-down car had connected Diego to foundation resources. But the real transformation had come from recognizing that individual acts of kindness could become systemic approaches to community support. The federal funding would provide resources and recognition, but the heart of the program would remain what it had always been, neighbors helping neighbors solve problems together. That evening, as Diego and Carlos sat in their kitchen reviewing college acceptance letters and scholarship opportunities that now seemed limitless rather than impossible, Carlos asked a question that captured the magnitude of what had changed. "Dad, do you think Mom would have believed all this could happen?" Diego looked out the window at his auto repair shop, now expanded into a bustling community center where university students worked alongside elderly volunteers, where teenagers taught computer skills while learning automotive repair, where people came not just for car fixes, but for solutions to problems they didn't know how to solve alone. "I think she would have believed in the people making it happen," Diego replied. "The rest would have surprised her as much as it surprises me." 2 years later, Diego Martinez stood at the podium of the National Rural Development Conference in Washington, D.C., looking out at an audience of 800 community leaders, policymakers, and academics who had come to learn about the distributed community anchor model that had begun in a converted gas station in Millbrook. The statistics projected on the screen behind him told a story that still seemed impossible. 127 communities across 23 states had implemented variations of the Millbrook model, serving over 45,000 rural residents through networks of coordinated community anchors. The average cost per person served was 34% lower than traditional centralized approaches, while satisfaction rates exceeded 89%, and long-term community retention of young adults had increased by 52%. But Diego had learned that the numbers, impressive as they were, didn't capture what mattered most about the transformation that had begun with a simple act of kindness on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. "The distributed community anchor model works," Diego told the audience, "not because it's a more efficient way to deliver services, but because it's based on a different understanding of what community support actually means." He clicked to the next slide, which showed a photograph of Tommy Chen, now 19 and a sophomore at Millbrook Community College, studying business administration while managing the technology coordination network for 4 rural communities in Arizona, New Mexico, and Nevada. Traditional community development approaches assume that rural areas need outside expertise to solve local problems. What we've learned is that rural communities already have the expertise they need. They just need resources and coordination systems that allow that expertise to flourish. Diego clicked again, revealing a photo of Mrs. Patterson working with 3 visiting community leaders from Montana, teaching them how to integrate health services with food security programs. At 72, Patricia had become one of the most sought-after consultants in rural health programming, traveling monthly to help other communities develop their own versions of peer-supported healthcare. Patricia Patterson was running an informal community health program long before she had official funding or recognition. The distributed anchor model didn't create her expertise. It provided resources that allowed her to share that expertise with other communities facing similar challenges. The next slide showed Mr. Chen's corner market, now expanded to include a regional technology training center where elderly residents from 12 surrounding communities came to learn digital literacy from teenagers who had learned from Tommy and his peer educators. Mr. Chen was already connecting people with resources and opportunities. What changed was our recognition that his informal coordination role was actually sophisticated workforce development programming that deserved professional support and expansion opportunities. Diego paused, looking out at faces that reflected the same mixture of skepticism and hope he'd seen in his own mirror 3 years earlier. The question isn't whether rural communities have the capacity to solve their own problems. The question is whether we're willing to support solutions that look different from urban models. He clicked to a slide showing current employment statistics for Millbrook. Unemployment had dropped from 14% to 3.2%. Average household income had increased by 28%. Most significantly, 67% of high school graduates were choosing to remain in the community or return after college, reversing a population decline that had been ongoing for 20 years. "Dad, do you think Mom would have believed all this could happen?" Diego looked out the window at his auto repair shop, now expanded into a bustling community center where university students worked alongside elderly volunteers, where teenagers taught computer skills while learning automotive repair, where people came not just for car fixes, but for solutions to problems they didn't know how to solve alone. "I think she would have believed in the people making it happen," Diego replied. "The rest would have surprised her as much as it surprises me." 2 years later, Diego Martinez stood at the podium of the National Rural Development Conference in Washington, D.C., looking out at an audience of 800 community leaders, policymakers, and academics who had come to learn about the distributed community anchor model that had begun in a converted gas station in Millbrook. The statistics projected on the screen behind him told a story that still seemed impossible. 127 communities across 23 states had implemented variations of the Millbrook model, serving over 45,000 rural residents through networks of coordinated community anchors. The average cost per person served was 34% lower than traditional centralized approaches, while satisfaction rates exceeded 89%, and long-term community retention of young adults had increased by 52%. But Diego had learned that the numbers, impressive as they were, didn't capture what mattered most about the transformation that had begun with a simple act of kindness on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. The distributed community anchor model works, Diego told the audience, not because it's a more efficient way to deliver services, but because it's based on a different understanding of what community support actually means. He clicked to the next slide, which showed a photograph of Tommy Chen, now 19 and a sophomore at Millbrook Community College, studying business administration while managing the technology coordination network for 4 rural communities in Arizona, New Mexico, and Nevada. Traditional community development approaches assume that rural areas need outside expertise to solve local problems. What we've learned is that rural communities already have the expertise they need. They just need resources and coordination systems that allow that expertise to flourish. Diego clicked again, revealing a photo of Mrs. Patterson working with 3 visiting community leaders from Montana, teaching them how to integrate health services with food security programs. At 72, Patricia had become one of the most sought-after consultants in rural health programming, traveling monthly to help other communities develop their own versions of peer-supported healthcare. Patricia Patterson was running an informal community health program long before she had official funding or recognition. The distributed anchor model didn't create her expertise. It provided resources that allowed her to share that expertise with other communities facing similar challenges. The next slide showed Mr. Chen's corner market, now expanded to include a regional technology training center where elderly residents from 12 surrounding communities came to learn digital literacy from teenagers who had learned from Tommy and his peer educators. Mr. Chen was already connecting people with resources and opportunities. What changed was our recognition that his informal coordination role was actually sophisticated workforce development programming that deserved professional support and expansion opportunities. Diego paused, looking out at faces that reflected the same mixture of skepticism and hope he'd seen in his own mirror 3 years earlier. The question isn't whether rural communities have the capacity to solve their own problems. The question is whether we're willing to support solutions that look different from urban models. He clicked to a slide showing current employment statistics for Millbrook. Unemployment had dropped from 14% to 3.2%. Average household income had increased by 28%. Most significantly, 67% of high school graduates were choosing to remain in the community or return after college, reversing a population decline that had been ongoing for 20 years. These improvements didn't come from attracting outside businesses or convincing urban employers to relocate to rural areas. They came from recognizing and supporting the economic activity that was already happening in our community. Diego's voice grew more personal as he continued. 3 years ago, I was a single father trying to figure out how to pay for my son's education while keeping a small auto repair shop afloat. I thought success meant finding ways to compete with larger businesses that had more resources and better equipment. He clicked to a photo of himself working alongside engineering students from 3 different universities, teaching diagnostic techniques that were now being studied at automotive technology programs nationwide. What I learned is that my limitations, working with older equipment, serving customers who couldn't pay market rates, developing creative solutions with limited resources, those weren't disadvantages to overcome. They were expertise that larger operations couldn't replicate. The next slide showed Carlos, now 20, and completing his junior year in a dual degree program that combined music therapy with community development. He was photographed leading a musical therapy session for elderly residents while simultaneously training university students in arts-based community engagement techniques. My son's education wasn't delayed by our decision to prioritize community development over individual advancement. It was enhanced by his involvement in work that connected his academic interests with real-world applications. Diego looked directly at a section of the audience he knew included several rural community leaders who were struggling with the same questions he'd faced 3 years earlier. The hardest part of developing distributed community anchor networks isn't the coordination or the funding or the partnership development. The hardest part is believing that what you're already doing has value that extends beyond your immediate community. He clicked to a map showing the current distribution of communities implementing anchor network models. The dots stretched from Maine to California, from Minnesota to Texas, each representing a community that had adapted the Millbrook principles to their own local conditions and needs. Every one of these communities developed different approaches based on their existing resources and relationships. The community in northern Maine that built their network around a fishing cooperative and a seasonal tourism business. The community in Kansas that centered their model on a grain elevator and a farm equipment repair shop. The community in Nevada that integrated their network with mining industry workforce development and healthcare services. Diego's voice grew stronger as he approached his conclusion. What they all share isn't identical programming or organizational structures. What they share is recognition that community support works best when it builds on existing relationships and local knowledge rather than replacing them with external expertise. He clicked to the final slide, which showed a simple statement: community anchors aren't built, they're recognized. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the surgeon whose car breakdown led to everything you've heard about today, recently told me something that captures why the distributed anchor model succeeds where other approaches fail. She said that the best medical interventions aren't the ones that introduce new systems to the body, but the ones that support the body's existing capacity to heal itself. Diego looked around the audience one final time. Rural communities don't need to be saved by outside interventions. They need their existing strengths to be recognized, supported, and connected with resources that allow those strengths to flourish. As the audience rose in sustained applause, Diego thought about the journey that had brought him to this podium. It had begun with a simple decision to help a stranger in need, asking for nothing in return. That decision had led to opportunities he'd never imagined, but more importantly, it had led to understanding that individual acts of kindness could become systematic approaches to community care. After the conference, Diego drove through downtown Washington, D.C., past monuments to leaders who had shaped American history through bold decisions and principled stands. But his thoughts were on Mrs. Patterson, who would be serving dinner to families in Millbrook that evening, some of whom would stay after closing to participate in health education programs. On Mr. Chen, who would be helping teenagers with college applications, while elderly residents learned to video chat with distant grandchildren. On Tommy Chen and dozens of other young people who had chosen to build their futures in rural communities rather than abandoning them for urban opportunities. The distributed community anchor model had succeeded because it was based on a simple recognition that communities are strongest when they invest in people who invest in each other. The resources and recognition had made expansion possible, but the foundation had always been neighbors helping neighbors solve problems together. As Diego drove toward the airport for his flight back to Millbrook, he received a text message from Dr. Vasquez. 7-year-old boy with car trouble needs help. Know anyone in rural Iowa who might be willing to take a look? Diego smiled and immediately forwarded the message to Janet Williams, the community anchor coordinator for the rural Iowa network. Within an hour, he received a response. Problem solved. Car fixed, family safe. Coordinated through 3 anchor locations. No charge. Some patterns, Diego realized, were worth replicating across time and distance. The best solutions weren't the ones that solved individual problems, but the ones that created systems where problems could be solved by people who cared about each other's success. Diego Martinez had started as an invisible mechanic worried about his son's future. He had become a nationally recognized expert in community development. But most importantly, he had learned that the most powerful changes happened not when you climbed the ladder of individual success, but when you built networks that allowed everyone to succeed together. The stranger whose car he'd fixed for free had returned with life-changing news. But the real change had come from understanding that kindness, when systematized and supported, could transform not just individual lives but entire communities. As his plane lifted off from Washington, D.C., carrying him home to Millbrook, Diego carried with him the knowledge that sometimes the most important victories weren't the ones that made headlines, but the ones that made it possible for people to take care of each other with dignity, resources, and hope. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.